Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd.
On today's episode of the Sumúd Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Paul Biggar, the founder of pro-Palestine, a coalition where thousands of tech workers collaborate on projects to advance the cause of Palestinian freedom. Paul previously founded a unicorn and multi-billion-dollar startup called Circle CI. However, he was removed from its board after writing a viral blog post titled "I Can't Sleep" for Gaza, which led him to create Tech for Palestine. Known as a tech innovator, he also founded Darklang, a next-generation developer tool that simplifies cloud backend development. Paul, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So I've been a fan. I don't mean to say it negative in a like a fanboy way, but I've been a fan because of the work that you've been doing since January. As I mentioned earlier, I have the little Palestine icon or logo on all my social media profiles. I want to ask you, how does this work? When you were on the board for Circle CI, you founded it, you did the blog post. What was it? 2 weeks after? 10 days after? What did that look like? What did the conversation look like?
Yeah, it was interesting because they really didn't consult with me very much. So, what happened specifically? So I founded Circle CI in 2011. I was the CEO until 2015, and then we brought in new management, and I stepped back, and then I stepped away, and I stayed on the board, right? And so the board is governance, right? There's 11 people or something like that are on the board, and I was there as the founder, sort of the voice of the origin story, but I was there through there's provisions in the documents by which you create the company that says that people who own some of this type of stock are allowed to elect someone to sit on the board, and that's why I was there. And we hadn't really touched it in years, but I no longer controlled that part of things. So when management wanted to take me out, what they did was they went and they talked to some other people who could vote there and basically outvoted me. And so they voted me off the board as opposed to like specifically firing me.
Okay.
So it's not something where like, oh, you can sue for like wrongful termination. It wasn't even a paid position. It was something where, I think they got a lot of value from it. I learned a lot from doing it, but I wasn't getting something financial out of it. For me, it was just like really disappointing that the company would do that. It's sort of like, leaves a bad taste in my mouth about the company that I had built.
Yeah, I mean, when they had the conversation with you, how did you process that? And when they said, "Hey, look, we're going to be removing you from the board," because again, I want to reiterate, you founded it. That your blood and sweat was in this as well, correct?
Yeah, I'm just looking up to see if I can find the email because I did not get. It wasn't a nice conversation where they let me know. I got an email that said, "Dear Paul, on behalf of the board of directors, friends, the board, and stockholders of Circle Internet Services Incorporated, friends, the company." It's like a whole paragraph of this, pursuant to Article 2, Section 2.12 of the company bylaws, Article 4, Part B, right? This was not a pleasant, we're sorry this had to happen. This is a fuck you. It is an email that came in on a Friday night at like 6 p.m. when which is when you send bad news in our society. And yeah, it was just like a really not we're trying to work with you, not we're trying to do the right thing. It's fuck you.
And to be clear again, you wrote a blog post, "I Can't Sleep," and obviously there was a pro-Palestinian connotation to it. What are they saying to you? Are they saying sorry because you spoke again? I mean, in your mind, are they saying, "Well, you spoke against Israel, so time to move on"?
So before this, we were sort of like not with the CEO, but with someone else in the leadership. I was having conversations about like, maybe we could step down or something like that. And their perspective was, listen, you can't be political like this. But it felt, I don't think that was true. And I spoke to other people who were involved, and it was my understanding is that some investor, and I called out some of these investors that were in the company in my blog post. Like I called them out by name and by their firm's name. And my understanding is that one of those investors got very annoyed, and that was the cause of it.
Got it. So I do a lot of DE&I work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And what's Circle CI's diversity policy or inclusion policy here?
So actually, Circle had a really good DEI policy. Like I was really proud of it. It was a very supportive of trans people, for example, at a time where the industry, I'd say far ahead of where the industry is normally. It's still tech, right? It's still an overwhelmingly white company. It's software overwhelmingly male. But it was one where I think we were significantly better than most. And you get a lot of this sort of like anti-DEI stuff coming out now. We were never that. It was never this sort of like meritocratic sort of story like like we see from Coinbase or Scale or whatever, the people who are coming out and being like, oh, it's, DEI is racist or whatever. Like, we were never any of those sort of, right-wing agitators. It was always like, we want to be good to people. We want this to be a good place for people to work. And my understanding of how it was like actually, far ahead of the industry, maybe behind where we would like the industry to be. But yeah, generally pretty good.
You missed the asterisk or the disclaimer for your inclusion statement of the company where it says except for Palestine. I think you missed that one.
Yeah. I think honestly I don't think there was many either Israelis or Palestinians in the company at all. I think it hadn't been at all part of the sort of internal company zeitgeist up until that point.
Got it. And leading up to writing that blog post, was it something that you just had to get out of your system, get out of your heart? Was it like, I don't know if you ever watched Jerry Maguire, the movie where he stood up all night working on a manifesto kind of thing? That's how I envisioned it with you.
It was very similar.
Okay.
So it's something I'd been thinking about for weeks. And usually when I'm writing something, the way that I write it is like I walk around my living room and I give little speeches to myself, like usually in my head. And it's sort of the thing about this one was, obviously there's a right side of this, right? You don't kill civilians, right? That's very, very simple. So like bombs on Palestine, snipers shooting people, like, the evidence was incontrovertible that what Israel was doing is wrong. But it's a little bit of a difficult story to tell, right? How do you come into this story having, literally it was like 2 months since I had learned about the Nakba, right? Like, so I can't really come into this with a perspective that brings much to the table. So that was really what I was thinking about. Like, what is a thing that I can actually say that can help this? And so that, honestly, it took weeks to even come up with like theory about like what the content could be. And eventually I realized that, I can't tell a history. I can't tell, something like moral. But what I can do is I can say, well, here's how I personally am feeling about this. And here's how it is affecting me personally. And that's what it ended up being.
And did you know the fallback that you were going to get for it?
I mean, I honestly didn't get any fallout. People are talking about getting removed from the board. It was like, I've more 4 to 10 hours a month or a quarter more free. It's as fallout goes. People lose jobs, people lose careers, people have to leave their homes, they lose livelihoods, they lose medical care. None of that. It was fine. Everything was fine.
Got it. And I have to ask, did you discuss this with your family before throwing the blog post up? Did you walk
Yeah.
through?
No, I had my girlfriend read it. The uh I had a lot of people read it, all right, because this isn't something that you put out to the world without having a lot of people read it. And the feedback that I got from those people actually made it much, much safer to put out. Like, I didn't have references in the first one. And I think the fact that I had literally 50 references, I spent days putting them together, made it a lot more solid. And without that feedback from friends and family, I wouldn't have been able to put it out, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of the references, I do want to let the audience know that you do have your PhD. And just so you're aware, I do try to read all the materials or books of everybody that I interview.
Wow.
I had trouble getting through your dissertation. I'm not going to lie. I had some gaps in knowledge there, if you will.
I mean, I tell engineers that maybe you might learn something in chapter 2 and 3, but after that, it's just it's so specialist.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And you grew up in Ireland. That's where you went to school. Can you talk about your life a little bit before October 7th, growing up in Ireland?
Yeah, so I grew up in a bunch of places, actually. My dad was a diplomat, and he worked mostly in human rights at the UN. So we grew up in Ireland, but also in Geneva and in New York, which is where UN things happen. So until until I went to college, which I went to in Ireland, I'd probably spent half my life outside the US, and I'd been to like 7 different schools or something at that point.
Got it. And what did you know or hear about Palestine? Because obviously Ireland and Palestine has a very strong connection. Obviously Ireland has their own history of dealing with colonialism. How much knowledge did you have? How much awareness did you have?
Really not a whole lot. So I remember I lived near the Palestinian, I forget whether it's an embassy or a mission or something in Dublin. I remember wandering past it one day and being like, oh, I wonder what that flag is. And I looked it up and I was I was like in my 20s. So it was like 15 years ago, maybe. And I looked it up and I was like, the Palestinian flag. I was like, oh my God, is that allowed? Are they allowed to have this here? Like that can't be right. It's like, do the papers know? Because in Ireland, we're also like, Ireland is quite like Israel in a lot of ways. We are an extension of the United States. There's huge Irish influence in the US. There's huge American influence in Ireland. A lot of people in Ireland speak with like mid-Atlantic accents as well. And we hold the US in great esteem due to its cultural exports, and we speak English, obviously. So I think I was much more aware of the US narrative, or the Israeli influenced US narrative on Palestine, which is just Israel, just a normal country. Palestine, it's some weird terrorist thing. I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah. And did that start to shift later on in your career, or was it more of a aha moment post October 7th?
I think as I got more progressive, and in the US, there's a lot of like identity politics. So you learn an awful lot your position on things from, well, everyone else that I know is of this position. So I sort of, I came to learn about that Palestine was oppressed. But I wouldn't say that I knew the details of that a lot. I remember reading about the March of Return when that happened. So that was like 2018, and I remember talking to people, some anti-Zionist Jews that I knew who were sort of telling me about their experience of like birthright and that sort of thing. But when after October 7th, I found myself, I found out how little I knew. I didn't know the Gaza and the West Bank. What are those? Oh, they're different places. Oh, I see how that came about. Okay, what's the Balfour Declaration? And learned how that came about, and then that's a whole big story, and it sort of came in pieces over time. So I would say that the vast majority of it was like post October 7th education.
Got it. And what were you seeing in tech that really made you wonder whether the industry as a whole was on the right track or whether the industry was biased? What were the key indicators, if you will?
So I already knew that the tech industry was trash. I had seen enough investors in particular talking about things that I knew were wrong. So for example, when DoorDash stole tips from their drivers, there's a lot of people being like, oh, no big deal, accidents happen. There's that whole movement of labor violations that were happening, and then that sort of turned into this big anti-progressive movement in San Francisco, where just an awful lot of people came out as right-wing, and an awful lot of people came out as, I mean this in a derogatory sense, Biden liberals. So you'd have people who were talking about the free speech crisis in college campuses, right? And they were talking about it like many of us knew at that point that the free speech crisis in college campuses was a right-wing op to platform people like Ben Shapiro. And Milo, and I mean the whole movement around that became Trump, and things like Gamergate and things that aren't talked about that much anymore, but I came along with all this, and I'm like, oh, this is deeply worrying. And so by 2018, 2019, I felt like I was done with tech. Like these people are not good people. This industry is not a good industry. So when, we're in 2023 and people are writing, I support Israel on Twitter, and I'm like, how could you support Israel? That is a deeply problematic statement to say, even in October, the invasion had happened, bombing had happened, but, even then they were sort of like, it was clear that they were part of a propaganda machine. And I thought maybe they were part of the propaganda machine in they were the consumers of propaganda, and they were just like unaware of what they were saying. But, as time went on, I'm like, it really feels like a bunch of these people are reading out the talking points as they're coming to them. So I found even early on that the investors in particular were very anti-Palestinian. And now that I've investigated a lot more, I realized just how deeply anti-Palestinian they were.
Got it. And then you eventually landed on creating Tech for Palestine. Can you walk me through that process and your thinking? And did you have a team already in mind, or how did that work?
So it was a very organic process. So I wrote the blog post, and I thought that would be it, right? I go to work, nothing's going to happen. I really, I had a very cynical view of the idea that people can actually bring about change. I was like, I'm going to write this blog post. No one's going to read it. Someone's going to cancel me. And well, that's the end of that. And what actually happened is thousands of people reached out to me, and a small handful of people had technical projects that they were telling me about. It's like, I've been working on this thing. And that's what turned into Tech for Palestine. It wasn't just, we're going to have a non-profit. In fact, it wasn't even a non-profit at the start. At the start, there's a Discord of 25 of us who are just doing pretty similar stuff, and let's chat every now and then. Discord is a chat room. for folks that don't know. And it turned into 40 people, and people kept joining, and we're like, okay, should we make this open to the public? And then we made it open to the public, and like 1,000 people joined it the first day.
So how does it actually work in an operational sense?
So we've iterated a bunch through what it is and how it works. But basically, there's a lot of projects, and as of pretty recently, we've been running this model, this incubator model. So there are projects that apply to join us that are, that sort of commit to working on this and being high impact and high potential and sort of listening to us. And in return of joining this incubator, they get access to our volunteer database and advice and mentorship and all that sort of thing. But that's what it evolved into. Along the way, it was a lot of different attempts at a similar sort of thing around projects. So at the start, it was much more free flow, and volunteers can join the Discord and see if there's a project that they like and that sort of thing. And we basically like learned and iterated and tried to get into a shape where these things are actually making impact.
Is that where newscord.org came from?
Yeah. So like many projects, Newscord was already a thing that existed, and that joined us as part of the collective.
Got it. Can you just discuss Newscord a little bit for the folks listening?
Yeah. So Newscord, newscord.org, is it's about media bias. All right. And what they do is they use artificial intelligence to analyze a bunch of different articles on the same topic. And then they use to show what people are leaving out of the story, or what narrative people are saying. In some over here, someone is saying massacred. Over here, someone is attributing it to Israel. That sort of thing. What do some people tell and what do people not tell? And of course, you can look at the New York Times or really any part of Western media. It's incredibly biased. Everything that Israel does is sort of like, toned down. Accidents are happening and plausible deniability is shown. And so Newscord is sort of telling that story.
That's great. Are there any other projects coming out of that you'd like to share with everybody?
Yeah, we have a bunch of projects coming out. We're on. We now have 12 supported projects, and we have a bunch of projects that we had before that sort of lapsed in a way that we're trying to get reactivated as well. But one of the ones that you mentioned at the start, the flag around your avatar. So you can access that at ppm.techforpalestine.org. That's profile pic maker. And it'll take any photo and it'll put a Palestinian flag around it. I have it uploaded on every one of my socials now has that. And again, that was built by someone outside the community who said, we have this, we'd love to join you. Every project that we have is like that. Another one in our community is Boycat. That's Boy CAT, which is a boycotting app. It's really very good. You should install it, and lets you basically scan your groceries and then realize, oh, I'm buying this from some Zionists, or this one is shipped from Israel, and so you can change your spending habits.
Wasn't it blocked on Google Play for a period of time? That's specific.
It was, yeah, and then they worked around that, and we helped them get that fixed.
Okay, I did get a request from somebody who knew I was going to interview, and they requested if you could do one of those ring logos with a watermelon. If they could.
Yeah, that'd be good. I mean, we get suggestions like that periodically, and I'm like, I think it's better to keep it, just the one thing.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I just promised them I would ask you. So
fair enough.
You go. All right, so let's talk about AI. And if you could, let's dumb this down as much as possible for everybody. Because when I say AI right now, the first thing that comes to mind is just ChatGPT for most folks.
Yeah.
And can you define what AI is and kind of build a picture around it?
Yeah. So maybe to start, I'll just sort of explain ChatGPT a little bit. So ChatGPT predicts words, right? And it looks at the words that you have put in, and then it predicts what words would be likely to come after those words. And the way that it does it is it's AI, it's sometimes called machine learning. And basically what they do is they take all of the data on the internet and they say, we can see here when these words happened, these words came next. And then they took terabytes, just so much incredible data, or such an incredible amount of data. And they trained, that's what it's called. You train an AI, you train an AI model by, saying when these words happened, these words came next. And basically all of AI works that same way. You take a bunch of data and you try to make, you get predictions out of it by training it. And the thing actually ends up the how AI actually works is really funny, because what it does is it creates this giant mathematical formula that has like built, it's like a, or 5x plus 6y, that sort of thing, and it's got like billions of entries in it. And that's what an AI thing is. And it's like it's formed by guesswork, by reading actual answers to the actual questions, such as the data from the internet. And then at the end of that, you've got this thing that's just a huge formula, and then you plug in some numbers, such as the words in the question in the case of ChatGPT, or in the case of Netflix, movies that you've liked before, actors that have been in those movies, genres, that sort of thing. And the thing that comes out at the other side is a prediction for a movie that you might like. And almost everything we use today has some amount of this sort of thing in it. Predictions for restaurants you might like to go to, destinations that Google Maps will take you to, what content you might like to see on your Insta, all this sort of thing.
Okay. And ChatGPT is an example that can be influenced by nefarious parties. I think I read somewhere where there were individuals trying to manipulate the data within ChatGPT to be pro-Zionist.
So AI in general is incredibly biased. And it's very difficult to tell what that bias is, because even to the people who run it, right, it is a formula with billions of entries. And you can't say, this is the entry on line 3 that is causing this bias, right? It's deeply in there, and humans are not able to, state of the art research in this has no idea how it works. And in some cases, this is by design. So, for example, if you're using AI to do mortgage applications, well, it's illegal to discriminate against Black people. There's a history of it happening in the U.S. It's called redlining, if you're not familiar with it. But you just feed the history of mortgage applications into a model, and then the AI will automatically give you biased recommendations, and no one is to blame.
Yeah,
it's just the machine did it. For ChatGPT, right? Humans choose the data that goes into it. The people who create ChatGPT are incredibly Zionist. They have a guy working for them, the head of their AI infrastructure. His name is Tal Broda, and he has said absolutely genocidal things, like things that no one should ever say about another human being. This is a super senior executive. I've seen photos of the CTO of ChatGPT, Brett Brockman, sort of like hugging this guy who had at that point said these awful things. And I'm just like, oh, like this is how the AI how the bias gets into the system, because the biased people choose the content, and they choose biased content, and then it's in the model now, right? Who's to know? You can't even tell what content was used to create it, so you can't even go and investigate what the potential bias might be.
Yeah. And in one of your interviews, I think you described it as AI washing, where people are saying sort of, hey, it's not me, it's the AI that's doing it.
Yeah, people. There isn't really an established term for this. I've heard responsibility washing, ethical washing, but yeah, I mean, it's sort of like money laundering for bias, right? You are hiding it because the system does it, and no humans can really be blamed anymore. No one wrote the code that did this. It was just an effect of the system that no one could have predicted.
Got it. And as an expert in this space, I think our segue here is really lavender and the use of lavender to target individuals in Palestine. Again, if you could just simplify how they're using it and obviously why it's so nefarious.
So lavender was one of a number of systems that Israel produced intended to automate target selection. So I'm giving the sort of like the how Israel would explain it, right? What Israel would say is, well, we needed to root out Hamas, and so we created an AI system that was really good at picking out Hamas militants, and then we bombed them. That would be their description. And the way that it was used is they basically ratcheted up the amount of targets that they picked in the first 6 weeks of the campaign, when I think about 15,000 people were killed by bombing in that time frame. And it's basically a sort of you can think of it as an automation of the genocide in a sense. You create a sense of rules or a set of rules that allow you to do it much, much faster. Before they had lavender, their rules of war by which they claim to abide needed to take an awful lot more, had a lot more human power. Every target took 10 hours of research to go into, so they just couldn't bomb as much as they wanted to. So now it takes 20 seconds because the AI does it. And of course, it's just a coincidence that that they can't audit whether or not how those decisions are made, or whether or not those were good decisions. That's just bad luck, I suppose. But yeah, that's what lavender does.
So it creates this target, but isn't there somebody usually at the end of the analysis, if you will, that signs off and says, okay, I checked this is okay, this is not going to target civilians, for example, specifically. Is that not the case?
You would think so. The article that describes this is an article in Plus 972 magazine, and they interviewed 6 people who worked with lavender, which is part of Unit 8200, which is sort of like the Israeli sort of like one of the Israeli spy wings, is sort of equivalent to the NSA. They do signals intelligence and technology and that sort of thing, and they build lavender. And according to this article, they spent 20 seconds for each target. And they had set thresholds where up to 20 civilians could be killed. In particular, the lower ranking someone was, the more civilians could be killed, because they used less precise bombs. They wanted just the higher ranking a target is, the more money you can justify putting into killing them. And so you give them a better bomb, which is more specific and kills fewer civilians. But for the lower ranking people, it's a bigger bomb that blows up and kills more people. About 20 seconds was spent. And then after that 20 seconds was spent, and the people quoted in the article say that all they confirmed during that time was whether it was a male voice in the that's being targeted. And after that, they would connect it into another system, which is called Where's Daddy? And I mean, just disgusting, horrific name. And that would aim to target them when they were at home, when it would have the most collateral damage. So generally it led to bombings happening at about 5 a.m.
Didn't matter if somebody's kid was there. It didn't matter if there wasn't really any data on whether that person.
So that's a matter of perspective, right?
Yeah.
From the Israeli perspective, no, it didn't matter. Those are the casualties of war. From our perspective, I think it would be reasonable for us to say that that this was actually deliberate, that this entire system was a deliberate way to kill as many civilians as possible, and was part of this systematic genocide that they were doing, a deliberate part of it. All the evidence I've seen, the data that they use, all of it says to me that lavender is just a thin, plausible deniability veneer to do what they had stated that they intended to do, which is kill as many Palestinians as possible.
Got it. And can you unpack Where's Daddy a little bit more on how it works with lavender?
Yeah, so Where's Daddy, as I understand it, is simply a scheduling system, right? It decides when is the best time to cause as much damage as possible.
Okay, got it. And I got to ask you this, being in tech, if I'm working on this project, Lavender, and I'm in tech and I'm a technical expert, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I have the heart to do it. What are the people saying who are working behind the scenes on this?
I mean, I think a lot of the time this plausible deniability happens internally as well, right? If you're working on that system, you're probably working in one of many different ways. So, for example, you could just be the person who's buying computers, right? Because that's, of the thousands of people who've worked on this system, a lot of them were just sort of like, buying GPUs to install so that whatever AI application the army had in place. And in fact, in this one, it is highly likely that that the people working on it may have been Americans or Europeans, because Israel builds its tech on Google Cloud and on Amazon Cloud, on Amazon Web Services. Right? These are things that are built by Americans and Europeans and people all around the world who put together data centers and put the computers for people to run their applications on. So a lot of the people who were actually involved in creating Lavender were doing it, somewhat unknowingly, we'll say, because they were low-ranking engineers working at Google.
That's scary. I don't know how else to put it. That's scary. And I don't know if I could live with myself knowing that there was a possibility that I participated in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I have a little bit of bad news. The problem with this whole thing, right? It's about distributed responsibility. To a certain extent, we're in the U.S. We pay taxes. Our taxes pay for bombs. Our bombs are dropped on Palestinians. We are all, in some tangible way, connected to what's happening. Like, we did it in a sense.
Yeah. I always say, sorry for anybody that doesn't like cursing, but the biggest mindfuck is being Palestinian and knowing that you're paying taxes to kill your own people without question. So it's very difficult. So back to Lavender really quick. Where are they pulling the data from? I read somewhere it's WhatsApp messages, for example, or is it something else?
So I think it is unknown where they're pulling the messages from. There was a book that was written by the head of Lavender that speculated how they might create software like this, and it made a couple of suggestions. One of which was data from WhatsApp, and we. I wrote a blog post about this that challenged Meta to come out and say, what is happening here? Do an investigation, figure out, are users of WhatsApp safe, or are they being targeted for being members of these of certain WhatsApp groups? And Meta said, we have no information about this, and then just left it at that. They released a statement at on a middle of the night on Friday in a not well read in the US publication Middle East Monitor, well regarded, but not something that people in the West read a lot. And was little tiny statement that said, yeah, we don't really know anything about this, but they did say that there were no backdoors in WhatsApp, and that was really interesting because it's a real talking out of the side of your mouth kind of thing, because they didn't say there are no ways that Israel could get this information out. What they said is that there's no backdoors, and backdoors has a specific technical meaning, which is an entryway that we put in for the government. But what came out later in this was an article in The Intercept, and this was known to a lot of people, including people who worked at Meta, that there are vulnerabilities in WhatsApp. And a backdoor and a vulnerability are not the same thing. But you might be forgiven for thinking that if someone is saying there are no backdoors, that they're saying there's no vulnerabilities, or that they're saying that there's no way they could get this information. But it turns out that Meta knew that there were vulnerabilities, and that the way that the vulnerabilities in WhatsApp could have been used is in the way that it's described in being used in Lavender, which is that when if you control the internet, you can tell a lot of information about what groups people are in on WhatsApp. And of course, Israel controls the internet in Gaza and the West Bank.
Was there, I hope I get this right, was it Pegasus a couple of years ago that was basically pulling information from WhatsApp? Is that accurate?
Well, I'm not terribly familiar about Pegasus, but that matches my understanding.
Okay, got it.
I do think that they fixed that. I don't think that I don't think that it's in Meta's best interest to have something like Pegasus out there. The question here is not really so much, did Meta do this deliberately, but more, why isn't Meta doing everything in its power to prevent this from happening? And as a result, is it safe for people who live in repressive regimes, which is all of us, right, to use WhatsApp? And as a result, I'm winding down my use of WhatsApp. I think a lot of people I know are winding down their use of WhatsApp because we're in the US. The US is heavily draconian on the topic of Israel and Palestine. They're attacking Palestinian protesters, and they're attacking people who are generally pro-Palestinian in any way. And so, you shouldn't trust Meta on that, because Meta has shown that they can't be trusted.
What's the alternative to WhatsApp? Just for people listening. Signal. Okay.
Yeah. It basically works exactly the same as WhatsApp. Exact same messaging, calls, video calls, groups. Yeah. So Signal is, and every Palestinian activist in America is using Signal.
Got it. Well, I hope everybody after this listening is going to do that or switch over. So I'm going to paint a dystopian picture, sort of, but if we think about it, Microsoft, Google, Meta, you list I think Chegg at one point terminated somebody or one of their employees for being pro-Palestinian, all pro-Zionist. Is our data safe? Are we safe? Should we be using?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay.
No. I mean, there is this huge problem, and even if you take Palestine or Israel out of the question, right? The thing is, our data is not governed by governments. It's governed by big companies, and they decide what they do with it. They decide who they show it to, and they, most of them have businesses that are built around buying access to it. So, for example, there are things called data brokers, right? And data brokers sell data that Meta would deem too sketchy to sell themselves, right? And they're sold through data brokers, and the money goes back to Meta, obviously. And it's the same thing in Google, that sort of thing. Anything that happens on Google, anything that Google can track, which is far more than just using the platforms, because they have these analytics embedded across the entire web. So anywhere you go, you're being tracked by Google. And that information is being sold to government agencies. It's being sold to foreign governments. It can be it can be used to determine an awful lot about you. And of course, it's being used for advertising. It's being used to tell you things, right? It's targeting you for advertising so that it can convince you of things. And of course, that's before we even get to the suppression, where each of these companies chooses to participate in the suppression of certain viewpoints. So we are long past the point of being alarmed. Like the idea that tech could have so much power and does have so much power is actually like really shocking once you start getting into the specifics of what happens.
So what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, we pay our tax dollars to the government, and the government in turn pays Meta and these other organizations for data or information on us.
I mean, yeah, the government agencies, in particular law enforcement, buys data from big tech, and you are giving them that data in your phone, right? You're carrying around this tracking device where every single action, everything you like is shown to big tech. So they know what you're into. They know this. There's these stories that came out a couple of years ago about Walmart knowing you were pregnant before you did. All right, because your behavior, you're giving them everything, and then it's being processed by these giant systems, and so you can find, no doubt, like you can easily target for advertising, for example, people who are pro-Palestinian or people who are pro-Israeli, and people did this in the Trump election, right? They in 2016 there was this massive targeting campaign where they targeted extremely specific things to people with extremely niche viewpoints, and that was one of the major ways that they won that election.
Got it. And if I remember correctly, too, when it was Twitter, Elon exposed the fact that the government was working hand in hand with Twitter to suppress information. Is that accurate? Or
I wouldn't say that anything that Elon said was accurate.
Okay.
That the government is working with Twitter to suppress information was accurate then and is accurate now. But I wouldn't take anything that Elon said about it at face value.
Got it. Talk to me about Unit 8200, because as we're talking about these large organizations, one of your interviews, you mentioned Unit 8200 and the role that these individuals play.
Yeah. So Unit 8200 it's sort of the Israeli NSA, right? It's signal intelligence. It is a unit with a very low acceptance rate. So Israelis have to do military service, and you obviously want the desk military service, not the killing people. Well, not doing it face to face military service or things where you could be in danger. So a lot of their technical people go to Unit 8200, where they build things like Lavender, AI systems, surveillance systems. And then after they leave the military, after their 20 or 28 months service, there is a pipeline that takes Unit 8200 into tech. The Unit 8200 is massively overrepresented in terms of founders, in terms of investors, in terms of tech employees, in terms of engineers, in terms of people in policy, the people who decide what kind of things we get to see. All of those are massively overrepresented from Unit 8200, and it is a very intentional process. And in particular, Israel calls itself the startup nation. This isn't just a pipeline into Israel, but obviously that major recipients are Israeli startups. There are something like 6,600 Israeli startups, and I think about half of them are making weapons. So and they use the term, this is really disgusting, they use the term battle tested for a lot of what is sold. And battle tested obviously means we tested this out on Palestinians. We tested this out in Gaza. And when you see that attached to a drone with a sniper rifle on it, right? Or one of these like dystopian checkpoints that they have in the West Bank, where there's a rifle attached to a camera and a giant steel dome that everyone has to walk up to and put their fingerprints and their eye scanning and all that sort of thing. It's like it's like the worst episode of Black Mirror, and all of that is coming from Unit 8200.
And there are a lot of tech organizations or resources / tools that are out there that are actually coming out of Israel, but they make it out to be that they're in New York only and they're not an Israeli company. And the best example I have of that is Monday.com. My organization several years ago, when Monday.com came out, we were actually building a partnership with them, sort of like a reseller type of thing for our clients. And I kept on asking, okay, where are you based? New York, New York, New York. And we were about to execute and move forward. And then I just did one more search and I found out that they were based in Tel Aviv. And obviously there's no way I'm going to work with anybody based in Tel Aviv.
Yeah. So a lot of these companies are either made by Israelis, made by people who are in the IDF, are headquartered in Tel Aviv, or a lot of cases have just Zionists as the leaders or the investors on their board, that sort of thing. It is extremely common for international companies to be registered in the US. So it is almost like standard operating practice that a company like that would be registered in the US and would like bill itself as an American company. But obviously that's increasing massively now because of the boycotts on Israeli goods. An awful lot of companies that are going to be started in the future are going to be where they would have been started in Israel are going to be started by Israelis moving to Silicon Valley instead.
So are we, I don't want to oversimplify it, but are we just in general screwed for the next 10 years until we shift?
Yeah, it's very bleak. It is, when you work in this, a lot of time people wake up and they're like, "Oh, we're really fucked," But probably the U.S. will be under a fascist regime in the next year. So you could imagine that the majority of the U.S. will shift to trying to actually be fighting for our civil rights and civil liberties and that sort of thing. And that will lead to massive transformation in the US, including the gutting and recreation of the Democratic Party, the creation of labor rights, the revolution coming for the billionaires and the people who made the system like it is. That's the optimistic version.
So give us some hope here. What can we do as individual contributors, if you will, in society to at least make some sort of impact? Again, putting our tech hat on specifically.
The main thing I would do is to educate yourself, right? Spend a lot of time learning about Israel and its connection to the US. This is for people in the US. If you're in a different country, learn about Israel's connection to your particular country. And a lot of it is suppression of Palestinian voices. But a lot of it is also connected to things that are downstream of that. So for example, if you're anti-Palestinian or you want to suppress Palestinian voices, you're probably trying to suppress leftists. You're probably trying to suppress the Black community. You're probably trying to suppress Arabs and Muslims because those are people who are going to be sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and you don't want too many of them to rise in society, or else you'll have a problem. So those are the places to get started. Just like once you start learning about this stuff, it's an endless chasm of Israeli influence. But it gets you in a much better position to understand what options you can do, who you can join, what people are out there fighting the good fight around those things.
Yeah, and it gives this weird power dynamic to these tech folks because they know that we are sort of under their command. They have complete control. They're all over the place, if you will. And it's really difficult to kind of get out of that.
Well, yes, but they're also deeply afraid. They like the power that they have, and they particularly like the money that they have, right? And here I'm not so much talking about the zealots. I'm much more talking about the Americans who are generally American billionaires who are generally right wing because it's good for their pocket, or politicians who are sponsored by APAC, and all that sort of thing. As the zeitgeist turns, right, as the narrative turns, some of them are going crazy, right? They're Zionists in particular. We see they're just like, it is breaking their brains. But some of them are like, oh shit, I'm on the wrong team, or not even I'm on the wrong team, but I can be seen as having been on the wrong team, and I don't care about the right team. I don't care about what's doing right, but I do care about making billions of dollars, or growing the stock price, or whatever it is a CEO has to do. And so raising awareness of their complicity, what they said, the sort of things where they say, oh, Israel has the right to defend itself. Their participation in the propaganda is something that's deeply scary to them, because it could mean the whole thing that they've benefited from falling down.
Got it. Okay, you've convinced me. I'm going to move to some deserted island and no phones, no technology until this gets worked out.
We're working on a couple of initiatives around this. Where the Palestinian movement in the US is right now is it's making a transition from, we have been this suppressed movement and we just need people to know. And it's now transitioning towards, well, people know, what are we going to do about that? Right? We're moving, I think, in the boycott movement, in the BDS movement, from let's just get someone to say they boycotted, into let's make these boycotts have real economic impact, right? Because if you look at the boycotting Caterpillar, for example, it never really had any impact on Caterpillar. But the boycotts of McDonald's and Starbucks are being discussed in every quarterly call, right? They're losing real money. Tens of billions of dollars are being lost on this. So we're now in this shift from please will anyone listen to us, into let's fucking take them down, right? And it's obviously that's being done because there is a genocide. There is an ongoing genocide. But from a sort of a movement perspective, the movement is doing very well. And there has been a massive shift in what people in America come to understand about Palestine, and following from that, what they learn about the police, what they learn about the billionaires, what they learn about tech, right? It's really leading to a breakdown of the system as it was.
We saw some of that with People's Conference for Palestine, I think, a few months ago too.
Yeah,
where people discuss it. Are you okay with me asking you about Elon? And
yeah, go for it.
So as you know, he visited Israel. He was invited to visit Gaza, Palestine, but refused to do so. And he went back on the availability, I think it was, of Starlink, the internet, for UNRWA staff, I believe it was. And then he changed that after he met with the Israeli regime. And then now, obviously, he just sort of bent a knee here. What's your take on all that?
My sense is that he's not a serious person, and that he dances around doing whatever he thinks is clever. Like he thinks, this is personal opinion, I think he thinks that he's far cleverer than everyone else, and as a result, he's very easily manipulatable, and he's being manipulated by the ADL. So he bought Twitter. That was a super dumb investment, but it undermined a vision or an image that he had created for himself as this super genius. And so Twitter has to succeed, or else everything falls apart in his empire, right? Tesla is one of the most valuable companies on earth. It's ridiculous. It's a car company, right? And there's a premium, a massive premium in Tesla's price, which is the source of his hundreds of billions of dollars, that is Elon Musk's genius. And so when it appears that he is not being a genius, which he is showing us, showing everyone how Twitter is going, that undermines everything that he's worked on. And so, he has said a bunch of things that a bunch of reasonable people would think is anti-Semitism. That's my attempt at not defaming anyone here. I think a reasonable person would read some of the things that he's saying and think that seems anti-Jewish. And so basically the ADL had him by the balls, and they have a history of taking people who are anti-Semitic and dragging them down and cutting off advertising. And they are able to influence billions of dollars of advertising. Twitter is an advertising company. So Twitter advertising goes, Twitter fails, Tesla fails, Elon goes from being a genius to being a schmuck. And the ADL is pro-war, pro-Israeli. It's not anti-defamation at all. It is something which heavily pushes a Zionist idea and heavily criticizes anyone who's critical of Israeli policies. So, he said something anti-Semitic. He said something that many people might believe to be anti-Semitic. That gave ADL leverage. And so off he went on his apology tour to Israel.
Got it. So he's loyal to the dollar. He's not loyal to a particular cause. I mean, that's the bottom line.
I mean, I don't know the man, but my guess is Elon cares about Elon.
Yeah. And ADL, to talk about them for a second, I read an article where Wikipedia is now not going to allow ADL citations. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was a wonderful read. There's a lot of things that you read nowadays which like bring a lot of joy from the Schadenfreude of what's happening. If you're feeling really depressed, head over to Haaretz.com, which is the Israeli left-wing newspaper, and read a couple of articles about how about people complaining about how they all hate us now. And you'll find ones about like directors and musicians and that sort of thing who are just having everything cancelled. And it's like, we don't understand why people hate us. It's delightful, and it really like reinvigorates you. And the ADL being cancelled by Wikipedia, I think, also one of these things.
Which is huge. I never thought I would see that happen. So that's definitely a major victory.
The thing that's happened all across the US is, and all across the world, is that the Israelis overplayed their hand. They thought they had a much, much stronger hand, and they were internally so hopped up on propaganda that they thought, well, everyone will agree with us that killing Palestinians is the only way. We have to kill all these Palestinians to be safe. That's just a normal thing that normal people think, and so we can do whatever we like.
Yeah.
And I think it has made them. It has made it very challenging for them to actually get a read on what they can and can't do. And that's been, I think, all change that has happened has in some way been taking advantage of them doing that.
Got it. So I have to ask you, between me and you and the rest of the world that's going to listen to this, do you regret doing that blog post? Because when I think about it, I think about Patty Cosgrave. I think that's the name. Where something was stated, then an apology came out later on. You did not do that. There was no apology that came out. You stood by what you wrote. Any regrets at all?
Not at all. I don't think Patty Cosgrave has any regrets. He's back, and his conference is bigger than ever.
Okay.
When people spoke up in October, as Paddy did, the zeitgeist was not with them. Right? They were they had to back down because they were threatened with the destruction of everything they held. And so this is why most of tech, who's either in the middle or just tech, which isn't Zionist, struggle to speak up because of how heavily Zionist tech is. But for people like me who spoke up in sort of December, it was we were at that inflection point, and so we were in a sense part of the tipping point. There was this article that came out called "Inside the Pro-Israel Information War," which told people about how Paddy Cosgrave was taken down, and it was like, I think, a huge part of a shift, certainly in tech, in the zeitgeist about, oh, actually this, the reason that you're seeing all this is because people are deliberately doing it. So now that we are, so it's 6 months after I wrote my blog post, we're 9 months into the invasion of Gaza. Anyone who has come out, it's a very, I don't want to say safe position, because as I mentioned, the Zionists are going crazy. And the consequences that people feel are in some cases zero and in some cases disproportionate. But we were all proven right. What I said in my blog post in December might have been a little controversial at the time, and now it's just, this is obvious, widely accepted. Biden is talking about indiscriminate bombing, so surely, my piece on indiscriminate bombing was is been proven to be true.
Got it. And I know you're coming somewhat from a place of privilege, being in the position that you're in, but and very well there are people losing their jobs. There's that young man with Meta who lost his job recently. I think he has a lawsuit with them right now, or going against them right now. What's your message to those individuals that are sort of like, I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to lose my job? And again, we both sort of come from a place of privilege on this one. Mm-hmm. But what would your guidance be?
I've given various different guidance at different points, because I think it's highly contextual. So like, if you have a really good job at Meta, right? Meta jobs are really good. They pay a lot of money. And you lose that job, right? Well, is that the end of the world? Well, it might be if you've got an expensive mortgage and 4 kids and you can't actually survive without that Meta job. In that case, you should keep your head down. Maybe try to work it from within if you can, but like, honestly, I can't say that the movement that you do is going to have a big enough effect. Maybe find a new job. Maybe find a way to whistleblow in a way that doesn't draw attention to you. And if you're someone who is much lower risk, and I was much lower risk, and in fact, that was one of the major reasons I wrote this thing, is I looked at my risk factor relative to the rest of the industry. Financially, I was fine. Nothing anyone could do to me. The company-wise, I was fine. Nothing anyone could do to me. And the getting removed from the board, who cares? It wasn't even the primary thing I was doing. It was like the third on the list of things I was doing. So I think it's important that everyone looks at their risk factor and looks at, where are you in terms of risk? And if you're in a very high risk situation, maybe your family will get deported if you lose your job. That's a real thing that's there. Maybe you literally can't afford rent next month, or your family, you support an extended family, perhaps. In that case, you're not the main person who should be doing this. But if you're in a position of relative privilege, or you don't have that much to lose, there's a reason it's kids that are mostly protesting, right? Because they have so much less to lose. I think people who are worried about future career, I think that's not such a big deal, because the future career will come. It's the current, can you survive this month is the main thing. If you're worried about, like, I may not be able to get a job in the future, I don't think that's a real concern. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many students out there, because they know that 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, they will have proven to be on the right side of things. And even if not, there's plenty of people who will support them for having done the right thing.
Got it. And how do we support Tech for Palestine?
So couple of different ways. So one of the main things that we do is we're just this incubator for projects. So if you're creating a project, if you have created a project and you want support, that's what we do. We're here to support you. So come, there's a thing on the website, get involved, apply for incubation. There's also a list of projects that we want to kick off. So if you're someone who has, more than 15 hours a week that you're looking to put into this, and you're in tech or understand how to build internet products, or marketing, social media kind of like movements, that we have a ton of projects that we want you to do. There's also a volunteer form and in particular, we're looking for people who have time, because really volunteering, it's difficult to put people who have 1 to 5 hours a week to work. The other thing I'll say is that you can use a lot of Tech for Palestine projects. So I mentioned PPM, the profile pic maker earlier. Another one that you can support. This is being launched, I think, tomorrow. Well, I guess this isn't going to be released immediately. But it's findaprotest.info. We need people to protest, and we have a list of all the protests that we can possibly find. And if you know of protests that aren't listed in this, there's a place to submit them. So just taking part in those initiatives, installing Boycott, and using it and boycotting Israel or the Zionist entity or the entire Zionist movement. That's something that you can do.
So were you involved at all in the creation of Reds?
No, I've heard of it, but I actually know very little about it.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is one question that some folks wanted me to ask you. Any chance that you'd be working on your own social media platforms that we can convert to?
So I keep getting asked that, and I actually reached out to the guy who made, or the company that made Reds, but I didn't hear anything back. I think that we are at a place where making a new social media app is probably going to be necessary. I wasn't of that opinion until relatively recently. I think Lavender might have been the last nail in the coffin for me. The thing is that even when we make a new thing, we need people to stay on the old thing to keep our voices happening where the people are. But I think as well that making a new social media thing is probably a good idea. I looked at Reds, and I think it was trying to be a new thing. And I think that probably the thing that would be more successful is just exactly the same. You share text, you share images and video. I don't think that there's a need to go significantly beyond that or to come up with some new mechanic. Those are tried and tested. So yeah, I feel that it is that moment. We're not doing that. That isn't to say that we wouldn't support someone who wanted to come in and do that, but those things are very hard. They're very expensive. 1 in 10,000 social media take off. That doesn't mean that you can't do it, but it would have to be like, I think that we're at a place in a movement where there's so many people that are being suppressed that we could actually carve off a significant part of it into a new social media thing, and where there's enough influencers who would kind of come with that. But you have to remember that most, social media is a business now. Influencers are making their money from this, or content creators, right? They're selling things from it. They're making money from ads. There's a big thing there, and that can't be replicated overnight. So it's definitely not easy, and it's definitely not cheap.
Got it. So when I prepared for this interview, I asked a couple of individuals that are leaders in tech some questions that I should ask you, because I felt like there were just things that, you don't know what you don't know. If you're not in tech, if you're not in the day-to-day, you just don't know things. And here's the question that I arrived to. What question should I have asked, or should I be asking you, or the world should be asking you, that nobody has asked you?
This is such a tech question. Hard to come up with a question that isn't in some way indulgent.
It's okay.
I actually don't know the answer to that. I instead have a bunch of things that I think would be really interesting to talk about, which maybe is the same thing, and maybe I'm supposed to reform that into a question to answer this one.
Okay, so if we do this interview again, hopefully in the future, what questions or topics should we be covering, just so we don't forget it?
So I think the Palestinian movement in the U.S. is massively important in terms of ending it in Gaza, obviously, but also is just like the crux of how this world is going to change and how the world is going to be is going to support Palestinian rights and liberty. So I think that how that movement works and how it's affected, I have found deeply interesting, and sort of where it's at and how it needs to, or how it is adapting, I think is like some of the most fascinating stuff that's out there.
Got it. Okay, so you've already agreed that we'll do a round 2 in a couple of months, hopefully.
Okay, fine.
Last 2 questions I always ask every guest. What would you tell your younger self?
Be highly risk tolerant. I mean, my younger self did that anyway, but I think I've gotten to where I'm doing it. You know, mixed bag a little bit. You know, I'm sort of in this because I was so risk tolerant, but it also, you know, brings massive opportunities and is massively rewarding to take risks.
Yeah, my friend, if I look up risk tolerance in the dictionary, I'm probably going to see your face as the image for sure. Last question is, what do you want your legacy to be?
I don't really think in those terms. I'm very much like, what is the best thing I can do now, or, you know, best, what is the most interesting, what is the most useful. I don't think about it in terms of you know, I'll be dead.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was really cool.
Great, thank you.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumúd. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumúd.